Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News with Lewis Hamilton responding to a disastrous weekend at the Hungarian Grand Prix. There is at least some room for optimism for Ferrari, with Toto Wolff revealing the chief contenders he expects to compete with Mercedes for 2026 and putting Ferrari right at the top of the list. Plenty else going on today. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. No time to waste because Charles Leclerc was in Budapest again today doing some testing, and another driver was doing some testing as well, or they were, and then they stopped doing some testing for a reason that we will get into. And speaking of similar topics, let's talk about silly season, if it's going to happen in the same way this year, because last year when Hamilton confirmed he was going to Ferrari, that caused a substantial spiral of changes, and this year we might get something similar. So what's going to happen in the driver market? What are Cadillac going to confirm in the near future? Rumour has it that Sergio Perez is still very much in the conversation there. There's been talk about Bottas, although, as we will continue to discuss in a second, Bottas has also been linked to Alpine. They've got Mercedes power. It actually makes a fair bit of sense, I might say, for parties on that one. So maybe Perez to Cadillac. There is an increasing rumour that Cadillac want also a younger driver. They probably don't want a Perez-Bottas combination at Cadillac, so they're going to go for somebody else. Who is that somebody else? That is a key question. So Cadillac have held talks with Bottas, with Zhou Guanyu, with Mick Schumacher, with Sergio Perez, Jack Crawford, American driver, among others. There's also theories around Alex Dunn. So Alex Dunn had another, he was, let's say, entertaining this weekend in Budapest in Formula 2, but he's had an excellent season. He had that outing with, was it back in Austria, right, in Lando Norris's car, which was very impressive for McLaren. So Alex Dunn, potentially he's going to win the championship this year in F2. He's certainly in that conversation, had a very impressive year. Reportedly, he could be in the conversation as well. There's also, I guess, a driver not to completely count out is Yuki Tsunoda, because I think everyone is recognising that despite the horrific run of form at Red Bull, he's not driving as badly as his recent form would suggest, and therefore I think it would be unwise to exclude him entirely from these conversations. Someone who's not in these conversations, though, of course, is George Russell, because he's going to stay at Mercedes. Now, there are rumours as to when and if and whenever, or what type of money, this contract is actually going to look like, when it's going to get signed, and what Russell thinks about it, because Russell actually said that he's not expecting this to happen over the summer break, because he actually just wants to chill out for a little bit. He said it here in this article after the race. He was like, where did it go? Nothing to worry about. Nothing's going to happen over the summer, because honestly, I want to have a rest and recharge and come back stronger in the second half of the year. There's no time pressure either way now, because Max has committed his future to Red Bull. Well, publicly he has, although obviously, things could always change unless contracts are made official. And this was Russell today having a good time on his yacht. I think he's bought this new boat, hasn't he? Didn't we talk about this a couple of weeks ago? Anyway, so Russell's chilling out. He's not bothered about the contract. That will happen when it happens. The big question, though, I would say today of the silly season period in the driver market is around Franco Colapinto, right? We know that he has been under pressure at Alpine. Anyone who drives under a situation where Flavio Briatore is de facto in charge is going to be under pressure, but we know that he's not been as impressive this season. Doohan was not great in that Alpine, but he was, not terrible in hindsight, given the, let's say, potential that he was expected to show, and also the results he actually delivered on the track. Gasly's done very well, I would say, with the Alpine car, but, they're dead last in the championship right now. It's not a good spot to be in. We know there have been rumours about even Perez, but we know the money that Colapinto brings in from Argentina and some of the sponsors are definitely very compelling for Alpine from a monetary perspective. But when Colapinto came into Alpine, Briatore basically said three things: be reasonably quick, score points, and don't crash. And he's kind of been neither of those things, really, especially today, given he was in the wall again. So BWT Alpine F1 team today put out there, during day 2 of Pirelli tyre testing at the Hungaroring this morning, Franco Colapinto had what they call an incident at turn 11. Franco was assessed on site at the medical centre and is okay. So a big statement for them to make an incident at turn 11. Now, if you just think about turn 11, so turn 14 is the final corner. The corner before that, turn 13, obviously, good maths, ladies and gentlemen. And then the turn 12 is the corner where the gravel is on the exit the drivers are struggling with. And then turn 11 is the corner before that, the high-speed right-hander. It's a brilliant corner. You know, usually downshift a gear and punch the throttle as soon as you can. But if you get a bit too aggressive on the exit curb, I guess also it could be possible if you clip the entry curb as well, but especially the exit curb, if you take too much of it, it is possible that you could end up in the wall, and that is where Franco Colapinto ended today. So this is the track on the rundown into turn 12, and this is the barrier on the left-hand side to catch any cars that have an issue at turn 11, and here's Colapinto into the barrier, and well, what we can see, the front wing is destroyed, the front right suspension, the rear right suspension's been destroyed, so he's obviously come in here pretty hard, and you know, he's hit the barriers, he's broken the right side of the car, the rear wing looks cooked as well. It's a heavy impact. You crash at turn 11, a crash like this, it's a heavy impact, and we saw the recovery after the fact. Colapinto's okay, thankfully, gets out of the car and all this. You can see where where he came off the curb here and ran straight into the barriers. So, and on the run down to turn 12, as we see, there was also this other image as well, which was a very similar image very shortly afterwards. So, yeah, what do we think about this moment, right? Colapinto into the wall at the Hungaroring on pretty much the worst possible time to do this. You're just going into the summer break, you're doing a Pirelli tyre test, so Pirelli want their data. Alpine, of course, want the car to return home in one piece because, as we know, the summer break is a mandated shutdown, right? It's a 2-week mandatory shutdown. The teams, the drivers, whatever, they're not allowed to turn up to the factory and put some work in because they've decided, because otherwise the F1 teams would simply work their employees to the bone, that twice a year, winter break, summer break, they have to take some time away from the office. So there's never an ideal time to crash, but today is certainly not optimal. Tyre test, Hungaroring, you've just been there a few days ago, you lose it at turn 11, end up in the barriers and total the car. It's not an ideal state of affairs. So what does it mean for Colapinto, especially as a driver who is on, I mean, he appears to be on effectively a race-by-race contract. They won't really tell us what's happening there, but increasingly it becomes clear that it's not like Colapinto is guaranteed until the end of the season, and we thought a couple of rounds ago he might be dropped with immediate effect. I'm not sure that's going to happen now, but it would be quite a remarkable way for Colapinto's F1 career to end in a tyre test for Pirelli where he crashes it and Briatore decides, you know what, I've had enough of this guy, gonna bring somebody else in instead. And I'm sure that Briatore has been smart about the way some of these sponsorship arrangements have been structured because, you know, I think, yeah, Mercado Libre or whatever that is on his jersey here, they brought on that sponsor Alpine because of Colapinto. But if Colapinto was to get benched or dropped or whatever, then do you think that sponsorship would just totally disappear? They might still be able to get some money out of it. So it's a question what they would do. Would they put Paul Aron in the car? Would they put Jack Doohan back in the car? Would they just go and get Valtteri Bottas now and pair him with Gasly? That's a rumoured lineup for next year. So lots of options, but Colapinto certainly hasn't made his life any easier with the current circumstance. Alpine continued to say they're not going to sell the team, they're not going to do anything with it, but given that they've shut down their engine program and are moving to Mercedes power, I'm not sure anyone really believes them. Let's talk about Mercedes because the rumour has it they could be back in business. They've put their older and clearly superior rear suspension back on the car and they were solid. Look, Leclerc ended up losing the race because of Ferrari's own incompetence. But arguably, the pace for Leclerc wouldn't have been as good as it was in the first stint if it wasn't for them running the car, you know, let's say on the very much borderline of legality. George Russell was faster in the final stint and actually didn't finish a million miles away from where the McLarens were, given those guys were pushing flat out the entire race. We're expecting Mercedes to come on strong in the upcoming rounds. They won in Canada. expectations that maybe Monza. I would be very surprised if they won in Monza. I really would. But okay, fair enough. Baku, Singapore, or of course Las Vegas, where they had so much success last year. Antonelli was not bad in Hungary. He wasn't great. He finished 10th in the end after a bad qualifying. But arguably Mercedes, they could have done better in the qualifying when they sent him out, the tyres they put him on, stuff like that. I think they should have given Antonelli a better go there, really. Does he not look like Senna in this picture? I don't know. I feel like I'm seeing more of Senna in every picture I see of Antonelli. But anyway, Kimi says, as long as I was running in clean air, the pace was good. Now I know I can fight for points in every race again, which is strong, right? I mean, obviously, it's tough when your driver's talking about fighting for points rather than fighting for the podium, but it is what it is. And Kimi knows that the race pace in clean air when it happened was at least respectable, and he can be confident that they can actually put something together. How confident can Ferrari be? That is a big question, and there were some further rumours on what exactly slowed down Leclerc. The Auto Racer article wasn't very prescriptive on what changed, but they did admit that they did raise the tyre pressures to what they describe as compensate for an unexpected loss of rigidity in an attempt to maintain performance. So they come up with a different explanation to the plank wear explanation, but I don't know if this explanation really makes too much sense, and it wasn't really clear what they were getting at here exactly. So I don't know, it is interesting, isn't it, right? We know that De Kester and the guys at Auto Racer are particularly close to Ferrari. Maybe there's a certain story there that would be better if Ferrari did not reveal or was not talked about so much publicly. And there's also similar conversations around the Hamilton situation at Ferrari right now too. So lots of responses after a challenging weekend for both drivers. As Vasseur says, we underestimated the challenge Lewis had to face at the start of the season. After all, he was coming from a 20-year career within a Mercedes environment, and changing all of that is not easy. Both Lewis and I underestimated what that change really meant, from the culture to the people. But Toto Wolff has an alternative perspective. Of course, he, for good reason, rates Lewis Hamilton very highly and says Ferrari is the team with the greatest heritage in the world, and for Lewis, driving for them is a huge honour, but also a challenge. He puts his heart into everything he does and is very honest. When he goes through tough times, he takes responsibility. That's what great champions do. But Toto also was talking about next year, 2026, what's going to happen in the upcoming season. And he comments on expected battles for the new year. Mercedes are extremely confident in their proposals, their car, whatever, for 2026. And what expectations does Toto have for who they're going to be fighting against? He says that Ferrari are the team that he is most concerned by and expecting to be most competitive. Now, the rumours on this have changed somewhat over time, who is expected to be the strongest, but the current rumours do suggest that Ferrari next year are expected, if they don't have the best engine, it should be second best to Mercedes. Audi, obviously Red Bull powertrains, Honda expected to be a little bit further behind, maybe Honda in third place. Then of course there's the questions on reliability. We know that in 2022 that was a bit of a challenge for Ferrari and even for Red Bull with some gearbox issues and drivetrain issues at the start of that year. And 2026 is going to be even more chaotic, as we know, with so many changes to these regulations. But he goes on to say, and then Lewis and Charles versus Kimi and George. What an incredible battle that would be. An Italian against an Italian team. Can you imagine? I've no doubt this duel will happen, he says, next year or sometime in the future. We will witness it, and it will be amazing. So Toto seems pretty convinced that at some point soon, either next year or the year after, Ferrari are going to put it together, and it's effectively going to be Ferrari versus Mercedes for the championships. Now, this is a pretty interesting assessment, just because, are we not talking about the elephant in the room here, the fact that McLaren are currently dominating this championship? But Toto goes on to say this, 2026, I expect Ferrari to be very competitive. I'm looking forward to a lot from Honda and with Aston Martin, and there's also Red Bull and Audi. Everyone wants to arrive prepared and competitive, and we will see who did the best job. Of course, notably though, what's his discussion on McLaren? And this may, whether Toto probably in hindsight looks at what he says here and thinks, okay, maybe I should have mentioned McLaren or something, but I think this kind of gives you an insight into the way that Mercedes are feeling about this. Currently, especially because there were some engine issues, some Mercedes powertrain stuff back in, let's say, Imola, right, for Antonelli, and Russell's had some issues here and there as well. It feels like right now, McLaren are integrating the Mercedes engine into their chassis with cooling, with all the other requirements, in a way better than Mercedes are currently doing themselves, which is pretty embarrassing for Mercedes. But that's also a power unit that has been around since 2014, effectively. It is a turbo hybrid that teams are very familiar with. Next year, it is more than likely that of the Mercedes-powered teams, that kind of technical integration will surely go much more smoothly for Mercedes than for anybody else, just because it's a brand new engine and it's a big challenge for McLaren to deal with. Now look, are McLaren still making a sensible choice buying Mercedes engines? Yeah, I think that they are. And from an aerodynamic perspective, who do I trust more right now to produce a better car next year? McLaren or Mercedes? Definitely McLaren, but who knows, right? Go back to an era, ground effect is basically non-existent or far less relevant. The cars might have some rake back in them a little bit. Can James Allison and the team cook something up? I'm sure that they can. So when you put all those pieces together, Mercedes are probably going to be closer to McLaren in terms of aero performance you would expect next year. Maybe McLaren still have the edge in terms of how they manage the rear brake temperatures and stuff like this, but from an engine integration perspective, and therefore in terms of execution and consistency and reliability as well, is going to be a big one. Mercedes should expect, and frankly should be, a significant step ahead of McLaren in that first year. So Toto's coming out and saying that really, of the Mercedes-powered teams, he's expecting that it will be competitive, I would imagine, but if it is Mercedes with an engine way better than anybody else, Toto will be very confident that they will be the team to deliver on that, and McLaren will have some teething issues to solve. That may change after a year or two. Maybe McLaren just nail it immediately, as they have done everything else lately. But Toto seems to expect that McLaren are not going to necessarily pose the chief threat, and it's actually going to be Ferrari instead, based on the recent rumours. Whether that will come true, we'll see. This is Charles Leclerc in Budapest today. He did a fair few laps. He put in 144 laps in the end, with setting a 1:19.4 as his fastest overall lap time. As you guys can see, the Pirelli tyres they were running, and lower downforce on the rear of the car than you would typically run at this circuit, because they're trying to imitate the 2026 car. So mainly this is data for Pirelli, but nonetheless still an opportunity here for them to run the car, get some more information for 2025 potentially, and especially for 2026. Hamilton gave his perspective on it as well publicly and says, "I'm not where I want to be yet. The fight's not over. Don't count me out. It was a challenging weekend, one to move on from. Grateful for the effort the team put in. Now to head to the break. I'll be using the time to reset, recharge, and come back stronger. Not where I want to be yet. Getting there is the assessment. The fight's not over. Don't count me out." So Hamilton's going to look to come back stronger from the summer break. Maybe there is some optimism here with some of the words that Toto Wolff has had to say today. I will say there's some pessimism, as usual, around Lewis and Bernie Ecclestone, who said the following, that Ferrari should go and get Hadjar, which I find a remarkable assessment, really. Like, I don't know. Hadjar is excellent, don't get me wrong, but the idea of dropping Hamilton to bring in Isaac Hadjar is kind of a wild take, especially if you are going to do it. Look, has Hadjar been the best rookie of the year? I think you can absolutely argue it, but Ollie Bearman is doing a stellar job at Haas, as far as I'm concerned, with respect to a very competent teammate in Esteban Ocon. Yeah, does Bearman have the highlight stats, like the big finishes, the big points finishes that some of the rookies have? No. But has he still been very good? Yeah. And he's a Ferrari junior. So, like, in a hypothetical world where Hamilton moves on, either next year, year after, whatever, Bearman has got to be a guy to really look at, right? Rather than trying to poach Hadjar. I don't really get that. He also talks about Bortoleto, who's done a sensational job lately for sure. And remarkably enough, over the last 6 race weekends, there are only 3 teams that scored every time. Red Bull are not one of them, when Max didn't score. McLaren are, Ferrari are, Mercedes are. The other team is Sauber. They've now scored points in 6 consecutive rounds. And this time, it was Gabriel Bortoleto's turn to get it over the line. These were the overall power rankings. Now, again, look, you can debate these until the sun goes down. I'm not going to. I'm honestly just going to present them as they are. And, well, feel free to speculate. Look, you can make so many comments on this, can't you? The one thing I would mention, not to do it again, but Stroll did a perfectly fine job this weekend. Stroll was, what, 200ths off Alonso in qualifying? And yeah, I'm sure he was slower in the race because of clean air. Like, Alonso had the clean air. He was managing, but Alonso had clean air. Stroll didn't. But they basically did the same job, really, Alonso and Stroll, and they ended up a little bit apart here. You know, you can argue it a couple of different ways. And also Leclerc, like, what more could he really have done this weekend, right? Given his own team predicament. But anyway, that's a conversation that we will leave for the day. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.